So the bottom line is we see the promise of AI, but how can we deliver on this promise and address these scenarios that have life-critical consequences for people and society? In short, how can we achieve trustworthy AI? And I actually asked this question a few years ago, primarily to spur the various communities who have been interested in building AI, interested in trustworthy computing, my own background in specification and verification, to come together and see what together we can do to try to address this question. This is a long-term research agenda because all those other research agendas I mentioned already, like trustworthy computing or formal methods, are still ongoing. So this is really meant to be an inspirational talk onto what more needs to be done to address how to achieve trustworthy AI. So I am trying to move, there we go. So before I talk about what I mean by trustworthy AI, I want to provide the context coming from trustworthy computing. We have spent over 2 decades doing research in what has been come to call trustworthy computing. The government agencies have put money into this, industry has put money into this, and of course, academia has been doing research in this area. And the notion of trustworthiness in trustworthy computing has come to mean properties including reliability, does the system do the right thing? Safety, does it do no harm? Security, how vulnerable is the system to attack? Privacy, does the system protect a person's identity and data? Availability, is the system up when I need to access it? And usability, can a human actually use the system easily? And by computing it, we've come to mean it to be essentially the digital systems we build with hardware and software and the people who use them. From trustworthy computing for trustworthy AI, we need to think of new properties we've never actually had to think about before. So we're upping the ante on already a long-standing research agenda on trustworthy computing by including new properties we have to worry about for AI systems. These properties include accuracy, robustness, fairness, accountability, and so on. More specifically, by accuracy, this of course is the gold standard for a lot of machine learning classifiers and predictors. How well does the AI system do on a new set of unseen data, that is data that's where the AI system is being deployed, compared to the data on which it was trained and tested? Robustness, how sensitive is the outcome of, say, a machine learning classifier to a change in the input? Fairness, are the outcomes unbiased? Accountability, who or what is responsible for the outcome? Transparency, is it clear that an external observer, is it clear to an external observer how the system's outcome was produced? And interpretability, explainability, can the system's outcome be justified with an explanation that a human can understand and or that is meaningful to the end user? And we're even talking about ethical concerns of an AI system, something we never had to talk about for a computing system in the past. And 2 ethical questions might be, was the data collected in an ethical manner, or will the outcome be used in an ethical manner? And because this is really the start of a new research agenda, there may be properties out there that I haven't even identified or the community has yet to identify. So the question is, how can we achieve trustworthy AI with all the properties that we knew from before, with the new properties that make our task even more challenging? And what I want to posit is just one approach, formal methods, the use of formal specification and verification. But I really want to emphasize that it's just one approach of many that we need collectively to use to achieve trustworthy AI. What I want to do in the remainder of my talk is to explain what it would mean to use formal methods to try to specify and verify AI systems with respect to the kinds of trustworthiness properties we know and love from the past, but the new ones, especially, that are challenging today. So in traditional formal verification, we usually aim to show the expression in the red rectangle. It's read M satisfies P. M stands for a model of the system we want to verify. It could be a piece of code. It could be a protocol, for instance, written as a state machine. It could simply be an abstract model of a concurrent or distributed system, but it is a mathematical object. The double turnstile stands for satisfies, and that simply means a logical system that enables us to prove whether a property is true of a model of the system M. So, we have studied since the 1980s or even before many logical systems that enable us to do this kind of formal verification. Some of these are now embodied in off-the-shelf tools like model checkers, theorem provers, and SMT solvers. And the combination of the progress made over the 40 decades of research in formal methods have really given us an array and repertoire of verification technology that's basically usable and also used in industry. And then P stands for the formalization of the property we want to prove, the trustworthiness property, whether it's a correctness property, like a safety or liveness property in a typical computing system, or some other kind of property that we care about. So when in formal methods, we strive to show that M satisfies P. That's how to read what's in the red rectangle. From traditional formal verification, and then one other thing I want to say before I move on to what's new is sometimes in traditional formal verification, we make explicit a model of the environment of the system. In other words, we might have a different mathematical object which captures the behavior of the environment. And so, for instance, if E and M are working in parallel, we might say E parallel M satisfies P. But E can simply be a model of the environment. Sometimes it stands for the environment of a reactive system, for instance. Another way to think about E is a formal characterization of the assumptions we make about the environment of, say, the program P, the program M. So just to give you a concrete idea of what we know and how to do, like with our eyes closed, is a technique that came out of the 80s called model checking, where you have a concrete state, a model of the system M, it's a finite state machine. You have a property P stated in some kind of topologic. And then you have a black box tool that basically shows how to determine whether M satisfies P. And the beauty of the model checker is that it will tell you, yes, every behavior of, say, the finite state machine satisfies the desired property captured by P, or no. And not only does it tell you no, it gives you a concrete counterexample, a single behavior that shows how P is falsified. So that's just one example of an off-the-shelf technology from the 80s that we know and love and we can use. But now, what about verifying AI systems And before I even go to the complexity of the properties we're trying to verify for AI systems, the properties I listed before, like robustness and fairness, let me first just focus on why AI systems themselves up the ante in the formal verification calculation. So now let's reinterpret M satisfies P in this context of AI systems. First, M could be a machine learned model. And think of it as a DNN or your favorite machine learning classifier. Of course, in the end, although a human being didn't build that model, in the end, that model is a piece of code. What's different, of course, is that a machine generated that code. That's what it means to machine learn the model. But in the end, it's a piece of code. And this gives us hope that the analysis techniques, static dynamic analysis techniques, and including verification techniques, might be useful or usable for the verification of machine learned models. The satisfies has to be reinterpreted, I believe, to embrace the inherent probabilistic nature of these machine learned models. If you think about a DNN, there are probabilities running all over the place, the edges, the outcomes, and they're nonlinear functions that are represented by the nodes. So we need new kinds of logics and new kinds of reasoning in order to do this proof of satisfaction. And finally, the properties themselves may be probabilistic or stochastic in nature. So we are really changing or upping the ante, changing the game in terms of the verification question when we're trying to verify an AI system with respect to a trustworthy property germane to an AI system. And finally, the most important difference, I believe, between verifying systems of the past and verifying an AI system is the role of data in this expression, in this verification expression. And I pull out data explicitly, I call it D, and it is analogous to the role of the environment in the old way of our thinking about verification. But I think the role of data, and thus the role of the environment, is actually even more important than what we know of modeling M, probabilistic and logics, and expressing properties like fairness or robustness. And this is the real challenge.